I'm back. And I get to come back next week too, so be prepared. Okay, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest this morning, Dr. Aaron Fisk. And I've got a little bio here, so I'll do my best.
Hey guys.
So he's a professor and Canada Research Chair in Changing Great Lake Ecosystems. And I looked it up on the website. Canada Research Chair of Trophic Ecology. Now I had to look up trophic.
That's wrong.
Oh,
I've asked the university to correct that for 7 years. They haven't done it.
Okay.
I'm actually Canada Research Chair in Changing Great Lakes Ecosystem. Yeah, welcome to the university. Yeah.
I looked at trophic just because I know you guys are all dying to know, and it's like food web and food ecology and such, but anyway, it's okay. Well, anyway, he's Zach Clear, and he received his BSc and MSc from the University of Windsor a little while ago. And did his PhD at the University of Manitoba and did a postdoctoral fellowship at Carleton University. He was with a short time with a research scientist with Environment and Canada and Climate Change Canada. And he was an associate professor at the University of Georgia before coming to Windsor in 2006. His current research focuses on fish movements and food web in the Great Lakes and the Arctic, which is quite cool. I was looking at some of the pictures from the Arctic. And past studies with contaminant dynamics. You've measured more than 40 master students and PhD students and postdocs, and you've published, it says nearly 300 scientific papers, but it looks like it's more than that on the web. And you've led or co-led grant proposals worth more than $80 million. So if we ever need anybody to help us with grant proposals, we've got our man. So with great pleasure, I'd like to give the floor to our guest this morning, Dr. Aaron Fisk.
Yeah, and thanks. This was really fun this morning. I didn't know that you did all this stuff.
We keep it a secret.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to take it from here. Oh, okay. So I got control. Yeah. And you know, I'm a pretty casual speaker, so if you want to ask questions as we're going through it, we can do it. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, what I'm going to talk to you about is the real-time aquatic ecosystem observation network. And I'll explain it to you as we go. Okay, I think you all know about the Great Lakes, the Laurentian Great Lakes, as we call them. I think, especially in this area, we kind of take them for granted, but I would almost argue that it's the most important ecosystem in the world right now. The world faces real challenges with fresh water. We don't, again, we've been distracted by COVID and political things going on around the world, but water is a real crisis. And we're really lucky in the Great Lakes to have it. It's 20% of the world's surface fresh water. And as we lose ice and glaciers and stuff, surface fresh water, and lose aquifers, surface fresh water is really important. 31% of our population is in the basin. 40% of Canada's GDP comes from within the basin. If you combine the United States and Canada, it'd be 3.7 trillion economy, and would be the 4th largest economy in the world if we separate it into our own country. And there's more than 43 million people that work in the space, and it's really important. Ecosystem services, what that is that measures things that the environment or the world does for us, and the cost if we lost it to replace it. It's a really great measure to try to make people understand. So, for example, if you wanted to replace the nutrient cycling within the Great Lakes and how it feeds our agriculture, it would cost $70 billion to replace. So as we lose those systems, the cost to replace them is really high. And I think we don't really get a grasp of how big the Great Lakes are. If you took the coastline of the Great Lakes and stretched it out, it's longer than the east and west coast of the United States. And it's binational, and that's really unique too. I don't think there's a binational group of researchers that work better together than what we have in the Great Lakes. It's a great community. But we're under stress. I mean, the Great Lakes made a lot of improvements since the 50s and 60s. I mean, Time magazine called Lake Erie dead in 1967 or 68. We're still facing problems. Nutrient pollution, as we all know, in Lake Erie, aquatic invasive species. You work with Hugh McIsaac, who's one of the world's authority on that. Habitat loss, biodiversity loss, all those things. We've made great changes, but because of climate change, we're facing new challenges as we move forward. And there's serious economic threats. For example, we pull a lot of our drinking water out of the Great Lakes. If you remember back to 2013 or 14, Toledo had to shut their water down for a whole week. And we continue to face those kinds of issues. And that was a lot of the drive behind what is RAEON, which is the real-time aquatic ecosystem observation network, which I led and included six other universities. It's a Canadian Foundation for Innovation, an innovation fund. So the Canadian Foundation for Innovation is a federal program. It's an amazing program. It's been around for almost 30 years. And what it does is it gives money to universities, hospitals, and colleges for infrastructure and instruments. So if you need a $2 million piece of equipment, you try to get it from CFI. And so IF Innovation Fund is actually very competitive. It's hard to get. Windsor's only had 3. They were all led by the Great Lakes Institute. And then it's matched by Ontario. Well, it's usually matched. This recent government has not been matching, but we won't get into that. And so we had $17.4 million to buy a whole bunch of equipment and support technical staff. And the idea was to build this observation network in freshwater ecosystems. And that's become, these observation networks are hot because things are changing so quickly in the environment that going out in the afternoon to collect a water sample doesn't get it done. You need to be monitoring and collecting data continuously. And the other thing now with the technology and cellular framework that we have and satellites, having that data real time is really important. And I'll talk about one of the projects we're working on. So what RAEON does is it provides, the big thing that we do is we have all these equipment. And some of them are really expensive, like $100,000. Our gliders are worth a little over $1 million. So as an individual researcher, to be able to buy something like that, or even more importantly, run it, like the glider, you need a full-time person to run the gliders, and I'll talk about them. You can come to RAEON and you can loan them off us. So there's a whole bunch of groups that have worked with us and used our equipment to do research and to really better understand how these ecosystems work, these large lakes ecosystems work. And I won't get into huge detail, but there is a whole pool of instruments and tools that we can put out into the lake that sit there and collect data. And a lot of the time they're real time, so we can go online and look at the data. And we make that publicly available through a group in the United States. And so if I'm a researcher at University of Toronto or McMaster or Saskatchewan, because it's CFI, it has to be Canadian institution lead, you can come to us and use equipment. And this is all, in fact, it's something we have to update. We got our funding and started to roll in around 2018. It takes a while to get the money in, and then COVID hit. But despite COVID, RAEON has been remarkably successful. We were fully operational in 2020. We have projects and put instruments into all 5 Great Lakes, but now we've expanded beyond that. We have equipment in the Yukon Lakes. We're working on Algonquin Park, and then Cubes is associated with Queens Biological Station. We're way over 30 funded projects. So you can come to us and say, hey, I need $200,000 worth of equipment, and that's leverage when you go to a funding agency, and leverage is here. Funding supported way more than this across all our partner institutions. Lear, we're a clear part of this Cooperative Research Institute at the University of Michigan. It's top-notch Sigler. We're the only Canadian university, Windsor, that is a partner in this, so it gives us access to NOAA funding. And so they just were recently funded for $40 million, and that's moving forward. We partnered on all kinds of other funding and stuff. And so what I thought I would do this morning, and there's more good news. Part of the money that we get for RAEON is for staff, and it runs for 5 years, and that was going to end at the end of March. Last year, I got approached by the Global Waters Futures in the University of Saskatchewan. That was a big consortium, McMaster, Laurier, Waterloo. They got $77 million back in 2017 to create the Global Waters Futures. We all got together. They wanted us for RAEON, and we went after what is called CFI Major Science Initiative. So this is another funding body that doesn't buy instruments, but it pays for the technicians and people like that, and the research stations and the maintenance and that. And we were awarded $40.4 million just before Christmas. Now the problem is that CFI provides 40% match. Ontario is supposed to provide 40% match, and then we find the other 20. The Ford government decided not to match the 6 CFIs that were funded. So we are scrambling to find that other money. We think we have it federally. We're just waiting, but it's been a real shell game, and it's created a lot of work for me. But it's great because now we're part of a larger consortium of universities. So our outreach is bigger, and the Global Waters Future has projects in Africa and Asia, so it's giving us more of a global reach too. So I'm going to talk about two quick projects that were funded using, equipment from RAEON. The first one is this real-time continuous and high-frequency water quality data to develop early warning system. Basically, we're working and we have a whole bunch of buoys, and I'll talk about it out near Point Peely to help the Union Water Supply System, which provides water to southwestern Ontario, or Essex County and Lambton County, but also provides all the water for the greenhouses out there. I don't know if you realize how important that greenhouse in Leamington is. It's the second largest group of greenhouses in the world. Produces billions of dollars of produce. If you go to a Costco in Washington, D.C., you see those cucumbers and tomatoes from there. If you go to Colorado, you see them. A lot of money. They want to get bigger. They need water. And so Union Water Supply System, Rodney Bouchard, I can't say enough about him. He's the general manager. He supports research, gave us some money. We leveraged it, all the equipment. And what we're trying to understand is those harmful algal blooms and what drives them. We know a little bit about why they form. We know very little about when they turn toxic and why they turn toxic and what drives that. So that's what we're trying to do. And then we're working with Roop Caravel. If you want another really good speaker, he's the best engineer at Windsor. I think Roop Caravel works on energy systems and stuff, and he's really dynamic. So him and another engineer from Queens, East Villon, are developing these models. So they're going to take our real-time data and then help protect the Union Water Supply System. So we are living in a time of change, and we take our water for granted. But I think we all know that we have these harmful algal blooms that form in the western basin of Lake Erie. This is a picture back in 2013 when they were developing. The water intake for Union Water Supply System is right here. And why this is so critical is when you treat water, it's a lot more complex than you think. And if things change really quickly, temperature, pH, salinity, harmful algal blooms, a lot of times they have to shut their operations down and change what they're doing, which can delay water coming into the system. But if they have a bit of a warning, a couple-day warning, what they can do is they can fill up the reservoir, they can reroute water to more critical things, they can prepare for this, and then there's no disruption of service. If the greenhouses lose water for 24 hours, you're talking about $100 million worth of vine-on growing produce that can be lost. They cannot have delays in water. So it's really important that we try to control this. So this is dissolved oxygen, which is a big one. This was in 2020. I think you all, what happens is you have eutrophication. So you have all that algae comes out to the central basin, it falls to the bottom, it gets digested, and it uses up the oxygen. You get this hypoxia, which was a huge issue in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's back, not quite as bad, but if that water sloshes in here, and it can happen in about 4 or 5 hours, that can shut down the water supply system. And also temperature differences, and we saw it all the time. So this is a little deeper here. That cold water can slosh in, and that causes a problem for the Union Water Supply System. So what we've been doing is we've been putting out buoys, and I'll talk about them more specifically. They're in 5 locations. They have a whole bunch of instruments. They communicate via cellular, and cellular costs are high again, and provide data that we can look at all the time. That is where the Union Water Supply buoy comes in. So the big issue is water sloshing this way from the central basin. And you can see some of the buoys we've had out. And what we do is the buoy sits there, and we have instruments on it that measure nitrates and other things. But then it communicates acoustically. It uses sound. So you can put out all kinds of sensors away from the buoy and communicate to it, and then it communicates to us. We have temperature loggers all the way down. We have all kinds of different instruments on it that measure things like dissolved oxygen, turbidity. CDOM is a measure of productivity in the system, chlorophyll, and then blue-green algae. These are these harmful algal blooms. So they sit out there and collect that data. And this is just some of the details about it. Those are what the instrument looks like. I meant to grab some before I came in, but they're measuring every 10 minutes. Or in this case, every hour, although we're finding out. But it collects a lot of data and it sends it to it. And we get incredible data. Like this is phycocyanide. These are blue-green algae at 3 of the locations, and every little dot is a measurement. And so there's all this variation as you go through the day. These are dissolved oxygens. I won't explain why they get super saturated, but the bottom one, you can see there was numerous events where the oxygen dropped down to 0 because the central basin sloshed in. So these data can come in feed into a model and be used to protect the water supply system. There's other issues, biofouling, that's stuff growing. It's incredible like here. There's probably no worse place. So one of the problems that we face is we have to go out and clean it over time. So the dracenids, zebra mussels, you call them, the really quagga mussels, come in and they really destruct this. So there's a lot to putting this equipment out and running it. So we had to go out and clean it regularly. That's part of the study. Unbelievable data. We actually have almost 2 million measurements from 2022 alone. The problem we have is too much data. And analyzing that data, and my students are amazing and are in dealing with the stuff, but now we're starting to use supercomputers and stuff to try to analyze this data. Unbelievable data. So just to summarize, these sensors are going to give us an opportunity to provide continuous real-time high-frequency data. The real-time is kind of cool too, because if we see something happening, we can race out and try to sample and do more work. These models are going to be developed to create an early warning system for the water utility. Toledo has that right now, and they've had it for a couple of years. And now we're leaving the sensors out all winter. So we took the buoys off the surface, they're subsurface down, and we're collecting data through the winter, because the winter is something that we don't know a lot about, but these continuously monitored systems will allow us to do it. And we also have a project up in Algonquin's seen harmful algal blooms in some of their lakes. And this year in particular, some of the lakes didn't freeze over until the end of January. It was unprecedented. Real quick on soap and gliders, because I don't want to take up all your time. One of the cool things that we have 4 of them, are these autonomous vehicles that we put out. We put all kinds of instruments on them. Here's some pictures of them being deployed out in Lake Erie. We have to do all kinds of ballast work. We have a new infrastructure in Essex building at Windsor. It was all renovated for our group. We have to ballast it, set it all up, and just pictures of them out of the system. And the way that they work is with buoyancy. So you can fill up a bladder and they become positively buoyant, and they go up, and then they suck the air out of the little bladder that we have in the front of it, and it becomes negatively buoyant and it goes down. And so you can use it to go up and down. Every once in a while it surfaces and it communicates, gives us some of the data, figures out where it is and recorrects itself. The ones that we got have a little prop too, so we can use energy to push them forward. And we put all kinds of instruments on it to collect data. If in Superior, we could probably do it for a year, but they put these things out in the oceans and they've done up to 18 months. Because they're working on buoyancy and not using a lot of energy, they can collect a lot of data. The longest run we've done so far is about 3 weeks. We have 4, there's 9 in the basin that are used, and we all work together, partially through Sigler and funding there. And actually, we get funding from the US. We have a full-time glider technician at RAEON, although she left to chase whales last year, and we're going to rehire this summer. But the project works. Yeah, it was a bad decision, because she had control over the gliders and was doing some really cool stuff. But this model works. So I'm going to talk about one last quick thing and talk about fish. So one of the things we do with the glider is we put acoustic telemetry on the glider and search for fish. Just to give you a little background, porgonids, whitefish, cisco, bloater are an important forage fish in the Great Lakes. They're also been an important commercial fishery. People like whitefish. Cisco is one of the species in that group, historically abundant all through the Great Lakes. They're really only very healthy in Superior and maybe North Michigan. So right now there's a lot of effort throughout the Great Lakes to bring these porgonids back. This population crashed in early 1900s. Environmental degradation of their spawning habitat, probably also sea lamprey. I don't think people realize how much money we spend to fight sea lamprey in the Great Lakes. They've been a big problem. Despite efforts to improve situations, they didn't really come back, and they actually disappeared in northern Lake Huron. So there's been a lot of effort to put them back. So you raise them in a hatchery into little guys, and you release them out into the Great Lakes. We release about 12 million fish into the Great Lakes every year. That's why you have lake trout in Lake Ontario you wouldn't otherwise. The reason we have Chinook and rainbow trout, which are not native, is because we stock them. So the goal is to restore these fish in Saginaw Bay and northern Lake Huron up here. Why? Because they're a resource for predators. We're trying to get the ecosystems back to the way they were before. And so some of the question was, what happens to these fish and where do they go? We don't know where they spawn. So what we want to do is determine where they spawn and where they move to and when that happens. And so we have funding in the US and part of the project. And I'll just talk about acoustic telemetry. So one of the big things that I do is acoustic telemetry, and so we have these little tags that ping, and we surgically implant them in fish. And then we release them, and then they swim around and they ping. What they ping is, if there's a receiver there to hear it, it'll decode the ping, identify what tag it is, and then records that. These tags can also do temperature, depth, acceleration, and then predation as well. So if the fish is small enough and it gets eaten, when the tag gets into the stomach and goes with acid, it changes its ping. I was involved in the development of that. We do a lot of that work, which is really quite cool. So what you get, this is an all, I see the really fancy graphics. One of my students did this years ago. Now, anyways, what happens is the fish swims in, it pings, you get hurt, and we can do all kinds of things like movement patterns, how did that preference, survival, spawning, cyclability, all kinds of stuff. I should have put up a graph of it. The Great Lakes is covered in receivers. It's called the Great Lakes Acoustic Telemetry Observance System. It's really wild. There are receivers all through Huron and Lake Ontario and Erie. You really can't swim more than about 10 kilometers without running into one of these receivers. Most of that investment's from the US. Not cheap. Those receivers are about $3,000 each. And then the new ones are more like $4,000 or $5,000. So you're talking about millions of dollars. Anyways, this array up in Lake Huron was set up to study. So the idea was that they grabbed a bunch of adult Cisco, put the tags in them, and released them into the receiver array. And so this is the array that you see, and this is where they were dropped. Now the problem is if they swim outside of the array, you can't detect them anymore. So one of the things we've been working on is this glider has this the acoustic telemetry receivers on them. It looks like a bowl. And what we did, this is new stuff. Not a lot of people have done this. Is these green tracks are the tracks of the glider going back and forth, looking for the tagged fish to see where they've gone outside the array. We've done it in Lake Ontario too. And it was really cool. We actually detected the Cisco outside the array and even further away from the array. Now it's new. This year we're going to go further down and do more of it. But we did detect a couple of lake trout that we thought the tags had died. So they were still swimming around. So these lake trout were tagged 10 years ago. And we found them in locations that we didn't expect it. So the glider really brings a new perspective to it. And that is the cool thing about RAEON and these instruments and this collaborative coming together to share equipment. So if I put out a receiver and somebody else's fish swims by it, I upload all that data to GLaDOS and then they can see where the fish went. So it's intuitively a sharing thing. And it's funny, even the network here, convincing colleagues and stuff like, yeah, we bought $500,000 worth of these sensors, but they're not yours. They're everybody's, and we're all going to share it. And it's funny with researchers, they're like, what? And it's like, it's okay. You got your equipment. We're going to service it for you. It's all cool. For telemetry, it's just intuitive, right? So we found a lot of really cool things using that glider that we wouldn't have normally found. So that's how RAEON works. We provide instruments. We bring people together. We have data sharing agreements. There's a small fee for using the equipment, but it's small to help us pay for these kinds of things. And because of Global Waters Futures, I don't know if I did it, but we're actually involved, I think I might have skipped over it, in another grant, CFI grant with 12, that's going to bring hopefully another 19 million into the project. We'll find out in May. So that's it. I hope I didn't take too much time.
I have a question.
Sure.
First of all, I think this is fascinating. I'm a sport fisherman, so this just plays right into my. The algae blooms that happen in Lake Erie or wherever, you said that you know how they happen or where they come from.
Well, we know the conditions that will promote. We have there's a serious lack of really knowing what the cues are for when they really multiply or when they become toxic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, but do you know that they come from, like, we've been told through the years that they come from runoff from farm fields and things like that. Is that true, or?
So there's two types of harmful algal blooms. One is just a really big bloom of any algae that causes eutrophication, right? It's really big, it doesn't get eaten, it falls to the bottom, bacteria use it, and then use up the oxygen, you get hypoxia, low oxygen. There's now another issue which is toxic. So these are those microcystin and other types of similar microcystin algae. They're actually not algae, they're blue-green algae. They're like a bacteria that can also photosynthesize. They were the reason, 2 billion years ago that we had an atmosphere. They were sort of the first organisms on the planet. They've always been here, but now the conditions that have warmer conditions, more nutrient runoff, they're becoming much more common around the world and in marine systems. If you've been down in Florida on the Gulf Coast, you know about red tide. It's a similar organism. We're now seeing these in Algonquin. They were always there, but the conditions to allow them to get more common have changed. So we do know that additional phosphorus and nitrogen runoff from farms and other places, especially Maumee, are contributing to that. I don't think it's the whole story, but yeah, the excess nutrients in Western Basin Lake area and warmer temperatures are contributing to that. That's a long answer. But yeah.
That question I've got, this is absolutely fascinating, and just like there's so much that goes under the surface of the water we don't know about. Your research is magnificent. You talk about zebra mussels a little bit, and also invasive species such as Asian carp. How prevalent is that today, and what can be done to control situations?
Did you work on Asian carp? No. So there's a couple of species of Asian carp that we talk about. The ones that gain the most attention are the big-headed silver, is it silver, that are in the Mississippi. Those are the ones that jump out of the water with boats. They haven't really found many of those in the Great Lakes. The big concern is they're going to come in through Chicago, through that connection that was created. They found DNA from them in places we haven't really found them. There's other species of Asian carp that have started to establish themselves. There's some down in Sandusky. They haven't really taken off in the Great Lakes at this point. We are concerned about. There are a ton of invasive species, like round gobies. If you fish, you probably caught the little round gobies. They're everywhere. But they've had some positive impacts on the ecosystem as well. Because of Humakizics, your supervisor's work, and I was part of those bigger projects back in before 2010 and past 2010, they've changed regulations on ships coming in to try to slow that down, and that has slowed down. There's a lot of policies and rules about that have slowed some of the invasive species that have come in. There's about 200 invasive species of invertebrates and fish in the system. Lamprey are invasive. Rainbow trout are added. Brown trout are not native to the Great Lakes. Chinook aren't. We've added and they've been around. So it's fundamentally changed a lot of the Great Lakes. Yeah.
Sorry, another question. So you mentioned Algonquin Park. I was really surprised to hear about the water condition in Algonquin Park, because a lot of those lakes are spring fed. And how does this happen?
Yeah, good question. I mean, so I'm part of that Algonquin project, but most of my stuff is fish movement and food webs, but we are starting to collect that data. I think a lot of it relates to temperature change. I think, and just changes in the system and how they work. It goes beyond nitrogen and phosphorus, like iron and the species of iron and how changes happen there. It's a good question. I mean, people are wondering. Algonquin's had a number of lakes that have gone green that they've never seen before. Not all of them. There are some houses there, and there are some nutrients going in the system. I think the big issue on this is just changing temperatures, changing precipitation patterns. These kinds of things are just, those systems are they have all kinds of mechanisms and processes we tweak with them over time. They can change how the lake sets up. So it's a great question. I'm surprised people haven't gone after it more, but it's not just in Algonquin. There's some Muskokan lakes that are seeing this. We're seeing Saginaw Bay and Lake Huron is starting to show a lot more of these algal blooms. They're even seeing higher concentrations of harmful algal blooms in Lake Superior. I mean, the lakes are really warm. This year in particular was really warm. We had the lowest ice coverage in the Great Lakes on February 22nd. It was only 7%. And that would normally lead to reductions of water levels in the Great Lakes. But we're getting so much water from the Gulf of Mexico because it's warmer coming up to the Great Lakes that we're saturated. We have high water levels, and that's kind of forecasted in the future. But these warming temperatures, and the scary thing is there was a great paper out last year by Steve Rubert and those guys at Sigler. They thought that in a lake, top is warm, and then you get down below the thermocline, it's usually about 4 or 5 degrees all year long. We're actually seeing the water under the thermocline is warming as well, and that's pretty scary. And Superior, the farther you go north, the more the warming it's seeing. We've seen it in the Arctic a lot too. Even my observations from being up there for about 25 years, it's changed. So it's going to be interesting.
Bill has a question.
Yes, just wondering if you do tours of your facilities.
Well, RAEON is just a big room full of equipment. Glear has some instruments that you could go take a look at if you wanted. Yeah, I guess so. Sure. I could have, I mean, it's fun to look at the gliders and see some of the instruments and stuff. I should have brought some of that stuff in. But the gliders are big and they're heavy. Yeah.
How, so this, I don't know, maybe an elementary question, you guys know well, but the hypoxic water you were talking about, how does it affect the greenhouses? Because as a layperson, I'm thinking, well, isn't water water? I mean, I know there's different concentrations of oxygen, but how would that stop the flow per se?
So, and I'm not an expert in this, and I've learned a lot about this in the last couple of years talking to Rodney and Ruth. When you treat water and when you filter it out, there's active charcoal, there's active things that we do use to clean that water. When you radically change the temperature of the water, if you change the dissolved oxygen, if you change the pH, it messes the system up. The system doesn't work as well anymore. It doesn't filter as well. So what ends up happening is the water facility has to shut down in order to change their conditions in order to deal with the incoming water. So it just shuts down the whole treatment process going forward. And again, with those buoys, and this year we're probably going to put a buoy out to the east of Point Pelee. If a FARO buoy says, hey, we just saw a change in oxygen and we have the models, we can say to Rodney, okay, within the next 24 hours, you might see low oxygen come in. And then they can make decisions about what they want to do. My understanding of it is if you really get a big change in water and you don't shut the system down, now the system is messed up and now it's going to take longer for it to deal with it. So if you're not prepared for it, the lag to correct it is longer than if, okay, here it comes, we're going to shut down for a second, we're going to change some stuff, we can deal with it better. Yeah. Yep.
The fish industry in Wheatley, from what I understand, is the largest in the Great Lakes.
Second largest in the world.
Okay.
Worth about $450 million.
Do you get any funding through industry?
Not from the fisheries group, and they are struggling a little bit financially. Union Water Supply System gave us $300,000 for that project because Rodney wants to develop these models, and he's been a very active participant. And Novasi, the company in Halifax, which used to be Venpro, they're the world leaders in fish telemetry, but now they've moved into this environmental monitoring. They gave us $100,000 because we're proofing their equipment in the Great Lakes. So we do have, there's been a real push in Canada and in the United States, but NSERC is the funding body federally that gives us money to do research. I really have problems with it, and I don't like where NSERC is going, but a lot of the projects to get money, you have to have partner funding to get other funding. Makes me a little bit nervous, right? Because you're getting in bed with industry. If it's arm's length, it's okay, but it also limits just good basic research. So if you work on lizard mating systems, it's pretty hard to find an environmental match. But that lizard mating or just doing good science is just important for how we do science. So you may not think it's relevant to your drinking water, but might in fact be. And that's what the US has been so good at. US has always funded excellence in research and not tied things to it as much as other countries around the world. Canada's done a good job too. I just worry about, like, if you work in oil and gas, you want $1 million from an Alberta company, they can do that, right? Or you want to work with a mining company, you think they have $1 million? You think pharmaceuticals have $1 million? You're working on an environmental issue, you got to fight hard to find that kind of money, right? So there's pluses and minuses to it. It's a little bit frustrating.
Aaron, it's my pleasure to thank you on behalf of the club. The RAEON has a length and breadth that we couldn't even imagine.
Okay.
And you've made a complex issue very simple for us to understand.
Okay.
And as a consumer, we're glad you're doing what you're doing because you're helping us now and in the future. So thank you very much. We're an environmental club, local honey for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
No,
This is really fun. I'm really impressed with what you all do. And-
taking a picture.
Oh, okay.
We accept new members.
Now we can talk. Okay.
Put your hats on.
Cool.
All right, that